Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, for the Thanksgiving holidays, I went and saw my wife's family in Oklahoma, and I was actually pretty close to Stillwater. I kept getting questions all weekend about whether we were going to stay for the Bedlam game. And so I kind of thought that, with it being in Stillwater and me being so close, that I would begin with talking about Bedlam. And what ended up being Mike Gundy's coup de grace. He got his first win over Oklahoma, I think, since like 2011, and gets to get the best of Oklahoma right before the day before Lincoln Riley leaves, and of course right before they're going to go to the SEC, and was got to be the greatest weekend of Mike Gundy's life.
No, it had to be really exciting for them. Great chance to make the college football playoff. Going to play Baylor for the Big 12 championship game on Saturday. And it was so eerily similar, this 2021 season to the 2011 season for Oklahoma State, to the tune that they went 11-1, beat Oklahoma in Bedlam, and then also, ironically, both times they lose to Iowa State in a close game upset.
Yeah, I thought that was funny too. And, you hope that they can somehow get into the playoff and it doesn't work out that was the loss that kept them out. I think they're in a position now with them being 5 in the most recent college football playoff rankings that they're in if they win. Because you got to think about it. I mean, I guess the only way they could possibly not get in is if Alabama were to beat Georgia and Cincinnati won convincingly, and then it's basically just chalk in the top 4. At that point, they'd be on the outside looking in. But really, it looks like there's a good chance that the Pokes make it into college football playoff for the first time. And, one of the best things about it is the way they've done it this year. They've done it with defense. They have the number 2 scoring defense in all of college football. And their offense has been very pedestrian. A lot of times, Spencer Sanders has put them in bad positions during these games, but their defense has just been extraordinary. Not a lot of big names on it, but they've been holding down these prolific Big 12 offenses. And I definitely think that in terms of the coaching carousel that we were talking about last episode, Knowles, the defensive coordinator for Oklahoma State, it's got to be someone that's getting looked at as a possible head coach also.
That's right. And you usually think about their offensive coordinators like a Todd Monken or a Larry Fedora being the one, that everybody's talking about. And you think about their offenses through the years. You always think about the quarterbacks like Zach Robinson, like Brandon Whedon, like more recently Mason Rudolph. They were known for their offenses, and receivers like Justin Blackman and Des Bryant. But you're right. I mean, this year you look at Sanders' numbers quarterback, there's a lot of games where he'll throw for like less than 200 yards. And in years past, like Oklahoma State quarterbacks are lighting it up with like 400-yard games.
Well, what's interesting too is they've had a lot of really good running backs at Oklahoma State too. It's been an underrated running back place lately with, of course, Chuba Hubbard, Justice Hill. Yep. They've had a lot of really solid running backs, and this year they don't really have that either, but this defense just keeps grinding out games for them. And I thought the Bedlam game was so interesting because it started off with what you typically thought of with Bedlam, which is Oklahoma State making a lot of mistakes, and even when they're the favored team, just completely blowing it. I mean, I remember, basically like a 3-play series where they get a safety, then the guy drops the kickoff and there's a touchdown, and suddenly they drop 9 points off, and you're just looking at it like, oh man, here comes another Bedlam, just collapsed by Oklahoma State. But I give them credit. In the second half, they gave up 0 points, and Spencer Sanders had one of his better games, and actually, by their offensive standards, they put up 36 points, and they kind of had to have an all-around team win. And I thought that was just such an impressive victory for Mike Gundy and just showed the toughness this Oklahoma State team has.
No, it really did. And I think it was big for them to get this win, that send-off for Lincoln Riley. I think this is the type of win that can kind of galvanize the program. And the last thing I would say about it is I thought it was really cool, on the weekend, and I know we'll talk about some of these other games, but you look at like 3 or 4 rivalries where one team has pretty much over the last 20 years dominated the other one. You think about the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, Washington State. It was kind of rare to see some of those other teams, kind of the underdogs, surprise you, because a lot of these rivalry games, you really feel like anybody could win. But Oklahoma State's one of those where Oklahoma usually wins.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think Mike Gundy, before winning this year, won twice in the 16 seasons that he had been there. So it's definitely been a tough road for him to hoe to beat the Sooners. And, he did it this year without having Mason Rudolph or Brandon Whedon or Chuba Hubbard at running back. And he did it with defense. And I think that's just been such a great thing. And I've been happy for Mike Gundy. I mean, he's a guy that is, pretty much a lifer now at Oklahoma State. He was a quarterback there in the 80s when they had Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas. Talk about a great backfield there. And, he had all that controversy with him wearing the OAN shirt last year, having a lot of players be upset about that. And he's recovered by having a great season. They signed him on to an extension. And I'm just glad to see a guy like sticking around at his home program, doing as good as he is. And Oklahoma State, they didn't get invited to the Big 12, but to the SEC like Oklahoma and Texas did. But maybe this could work out to their advantage because staying in the Big 12, they've got to be, one of the most stable programs that's left over. And they have a position to really take charge of that conference in the coming years.
They do. And, what's interesting is, they've always been known as a basketball school. Their baseball has always been pretty good too. So if their football is on this kind of level, they're really kind of an all-around sports school if they can keep that up.
That's right. Well, Joe, speaking of an all-around institution, I mean, one of the best public universities in America is Michigan. And they've had a really rough time in the last 11 years, losing 11 in a row to Ohio State in the game. Joe, it's been kind of hard to consider a rivalry the game when it's been controlled so much by one program. And of course, Jim Harbaugh has, been a really consistent coach. I mean, Michigan's had top 10 recruiting classes pretty much every year. They haven't really had that many bad seasons sans last year's COVID season. Yet everybody's been wanting to get rid of Jim Harbaugh before the season started. He took a pay cut. And then, boom, he has this amazing year where they have one loss. And when Ohio State, I believe, was a 20-point favorite, even with Michigan having one loss, talk about an impressive victory in the snow in Ann Arbor. Hassan Haskins getting 5 touchdowns. And that scene afterwards where they rushed the field at Michigan, which I've never seen before, and just seeing Harbaugh and just, ultimate happiness. It was one of the best things I've ever seen in college football, and I was so happy for him.
Yeah, that was such a surprising win, such a monumental win for Harbaugh. Everybody I think was pretty much kind of coronating Ohio State, feeling like they had the Heisman front runner, and they were just going to kind of waltz into the Big Ten championship game yet again. And Harbaugh, they had other ideas, and I do think the weather definitely played a factor and helped Michigan. But at the same time, I think that, we kind of found out more about some of the playmakers that Michigan had. Everybody's focusing on Stroud and just the plethora of the mentally talented receivers for Ohio State and Henderson, the running back. But you look at Hutchinson and some of those playmakers on defense for Michigan, they really had their coming out party in Hutchinson. I mean, he's one of those guys I think that if he has a good game in the Big Ten championship game against Iowa, he definitely deserves to be on the short list for the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hutchinson had 3 sacks in that game. He has 13 and a half sacks on the season. And he's a guy, too, that's a great story. I think his dad played at Michigan. So it's always good to get to see the family guys like a Bo Nix at Auburn who's getting it done for, the place where their fathers played at. And he's been an excellent defensive player. I like to see, even though Haskins had a great game with 5 touchdowns, Blake Corum had a lot of good runs too in that kind of spurred him. And it's Harbaugh's kind of team. I mean, they're ground and pound, they're play defense, and they're getting it done. I mean, it's definitely a lunch pail attitude. And what I thought was the most amazing thing about that game to me was that it wasn't a fluke. I mean, there wasn't any fluky plays or anything like that that gave them the win over Ohio State. They earned that win. It probably shouldn't have even been as close as it was. And it definitely was just an excellent win. And, Ohio State is Michigan is very worthy of that number 2 spot in the playoffs. And I'm glad to see that, Harbaugh is going to stick around and that, this is a good story to LSU and Florida and all these people that cut loose coaches a couple of years after they do something. you show a little patience sometimes, you might have the right guy and it could be a great thing.
That's true. A lot of people, were wanting to kind of move on from Harbaugh the last few years with his inability basically to beat Ohio State. Like, he was pretty much winning a lot against everybody else, but having trouble sometimes against Michigan State or Ohio State. And I looked at this game. The last two things I would say about it, Michigan, I thought they dominated up front, won in the trenches, which was key. And then the other thing that impressed me about Michigan was their resilience, because there were stretches in the second half when Ohio State pulled within one possession, I think at least twice. And both times Michigan had an answer to stretch that lead back up to 2 touchdowns.
That's right. And Joe, I thought the most amazing stat of this game, I didn't even realize it until Michigan won. Did you realize that was the first time that Ryan Day had lost a Big Ten game, was against Michigan in that one? He'd been the coach for 3 years, and Michigan was the first team to beat him in Big Ten play.
No, I did not think about that. That's unbelievable.
I mean, so what Ryan Day has done at the beginning of his career, I think it's further highlighted by that it took an inspired effort by Michigan in his 3rd season for someone to even beat him in a Big Ten game. So that just shows you that not just Harbaugh that's been having trouble with Ohio State, it's been everybody.
Yeah, it's only his 4th loss ever, because he lost to Oregon this year, Alabama, Clemson, and maybe one other one, like 3 or 4 losses ever.
Yeah, so, I mean, really impressive what Ryan Day has done. But yeah, that's why, I mean, that was definitely the best thing of the weekend, was getting to see Harbaugh get that after 11 years of misery for Wolverines fans in the game, and then 6 years of misery for Harbaugh. And so you definitely could see the passion there, and especially when the fans rushed the field at Michigan, that was quite a sight.
Oh, it really was.
All right, Joe, I mean, you talked about earlier, Washington State beat Washington in the Apple Cup, and that was a guy who got promoted to the head coaching job. The assistant coach has been leading Washington, got elevated, and he's taken over for Mike Rolovich.
Yeah, and I've always found this rivalry kind of fascinating, because there's something about Washington State and Pullman that kind of reminds me of a Starkville, Mississippi, with Mississippi State compared to Ole Miss. I just wish Ole Miss at times was as dominant as Washington usually is in this rivalry, which unfortunately they haven't been enough through the years. But yeah, I mean, Washington State to me looked really good. A good running back play. Their offense played well. And, with the coaching turnover, they could have fallen apart easily as a team. And you got to credit, their coaching staff for keeping them together.
Joe, speaking of crediting a coaching staff, got to talk about Coach O getting to have one more Go Tigers in quite the walk-off victory over Texas A&M. I mean, I was blown away by the end of that game. I've not been a fan of Orgeron getting fired this year. I thought that he deserved to have another season, especially after winning a national championship a couple years ago and really being pretty consistent before that. And for them to get that win over Texas A&M just one more time, especially when, apparently LSU's first call was trying to get Jimbo Fisher to go from Texas A&M over to LSU. And Texas A&M, having this 8-4 season where they beat Alabama, but they lose to Arkansas, Mississippi State, and they end the season losing to Ole Miss and LSU. I just thought it was such a great sight, and for it to be on a touchdown play like that, an epic drive where they had to convert 4th downs. And I just thought it was so simple. It was so earned for Coach O to get a send-off like that, and I really liked that a lot too.
No, it was great for him, just kind of a Hollywood-esque moment to have that kind of send-off. And, I don't think enough people talked about how great that win was, how exciting the finish of that game was, because of just the refocused and shift towards silly season and the coaching search for LSU right after that game. And everybody's, wanting to find out the status of Lincoln Riley. But the other thing I would say about it is one of the earlier points I was making in our previous podcast about Brian Kelly tonight going to LSU. I mean, this is kind of more to that point about how difficult it is in the SEC West. LSU really was your worst team in the West this year. Mm-hmm. And they knock off Texas A&M, who just a few weeks before that was in contention to win the SEC West. And so I think that just goes to show you, when everybody except for Vanderbilt is bowl eligible in your conference, I mean, that just shows you the strength of the league.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, you could basically lose to pretty much anybody in the SEC this year outside of a Missouri or a Vanderbilt. I mean, Kentucky can come and play, LSU can come and play, Auburn can come and play. Mississippi State is all everywhere this year. You don't know what you're getting week in and week out. And so that's definitely going to be a huge adjustment for them. But on the other hand, though, Joe, you can look at that game and say, this is why Brian Kelly came to LSU. This is a team that was completely depleted in all of their players being injured. You can argue from a motivation standpoint, they're playing for a lame duck coach. And yet, with all of these things going on, they still have enough talent to beat a Texas A&M team. And you still see some stars out there like Damone Clark at linebacker that are just wrecking stuff. And that's the kind of talent that you can have at LSU.
Well, that's true. I mean, the talent just kind of recruits itself. I'm going to be interested to see also if their talented wide receiver, whose name escapes me, if he stays with them or enters the transfer portal, Abude.
Yeah, that was one of the worst things that happened to LSU this year was, of course, Butte getting injured. He was probably the best receiver in America, and he's a sophomore, so he still has one more season. And so that would definitely be a big coup if Brian Kelly can hold on to him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right, Joe. Moving on. We have to talk about it now. I gotta relive the awfulness that was last weekend's Iron Bowl. It started off really surprising with just an amazing defensive effort by Derek Mason's Tigers. Derek Hall had a really great game from Gulfport, Mississippi, a defensive end. He had a couple sacks in that game. And they completely shut down Alabama's offense for 3.5 quarters in that game. Going into the fourth quarter, Alabama had scored 0 points. It was the first time they'd been shut out in the first 3 quarters of a game since they beat LSU when Jalen Hurts was there. And that was the last time they'd gone into the fourth quarter being shut out. And it was the first time I think that Auburn had shut out Alabama in the first 3 quarters of an Iron Bowl since the 2000 Iron Bowl that Auburn won 9-0. And so it had been over 21 years. And, really, I was talking with my friend of the show, Spencer, earlier about this game. It almost reminded me of the South Park episode in this game at the end of it, where the boys in South Park are trying to end their baseball season because they don't want to do travel league and they have to keep playing baseball. And all the teams in travel league are so sick of playing baseball, they try to intentionally lose. That was kind of what this game was like between Auburn and Alabama. It didn't really seem like either team wanted to win that much. A lot of mistakes made. You can point to a lot of things as to why Auburn lost this game. They blew a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. There was a lot of questionable coaching decisions, especially offensively. You look at Auburn's defense makes a great 4th and 1 stop to get the ball back. All they got to do is run the clock out, and Tank Bigsby goes out of bounds and gives Alabama an extra 40 seconds right there. And, I mean, I don't know how you couldn't coach your player to not go out of bounds no matter what, unless you're getting the first down. And even if you're not going to even get the first down, you need to stay in bounds. And so that was a huge mistake. And then I look at with the way that Auburn's offense played, even with them not getting that first down, why wouldn't you go for it on 4th down right there? Because my thing is Alabama is down 10-3 at that point. They have to score a touchdown. What's the difference giving them the ball at the 3-yard line versus the 30-yard line? They'll probably get there in 2 plays anyway. Go ahead and win the game. And then let's go past the touchdown that Alabama had. You go into overtime. Auburn gets the ball second after Alabama scored a touchdown. Landon King, who's a tight end, a freshman tight end at Auburn, catches his first touchdown ever with an amazing one-handed grab. Why not go for 2 right there and either win the game or lose it? At that point, your defense is dog-tired. Your quarterback, TJ Finley, your backup, is on one leg. He's hobbling the entire game. Go ahead and go for broke on that one. And the next 2-point possession, 2-point conversion play they had in the third overtime was a perfect play. That would have been great to win the game right there. And so there was a lot of questionable coaching decisions there.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those classic scenarios where you coach not to lose, you don't coach to win. And that's kind of what happened. Like I felt like Harsin was kind of coaching scared at the end of that game. And I think you bring up, some good points. I thought about, the 40 seconds they couldn't run off the clock when Bigsby doesn't get out of bounds, and that really was huge. Second, as far as the interception that Finley threw, in the fourth quarter, did Alabama score off that interception?
They kicked a field goal on that one.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of an underrated, extra possession they got that, helps them out. Also, I had a question about the game-tying touchdown that Alabama scored. Maybe I didn't get a good view of it, but I definitively actually couldn't tell if that was actually a catch.
Now, Joe, I will say there was a lot of questionable refereeing on the last drive, which I'll get to, but that is one thing that I'm not questioning. That was a touchdown catch. That was a legit touchdown. There has been a lot of questions about whether there was offensive pass interference by the Alabama receiver on that. I'd have to watch that play again to think about it. But I do have a couple plays I'd like to point out on that last drive. Everybody wants to give Bryce Young the Heisman for his definitive Heisman moment on this drive, but he got helped out by the referees on multiple times on that possession. There were 3 plays in a row where it looked like to me that he committed intentional grounding, one of which he literally threw it at the referee's feet. There was an Alabama receiver within 15 yards, and that was the one that really got to me. A couple of the other ones were close. And then, Joe, at the very beginning of that drive, after Auburn had punted it down into the 3, there was holding committed by Alabama in the end zone. There's pictures of it everywhere with literally an Alabama player's arm wrapped around the Auburn guy's neck, which would have been a safety, which would have ended the game they didn't call. And it's just, that's par for the course. The problem is, at that point, the SEC officials are going to protect Alabama because they're the team that's going to, have a chance to maybe give them 2 in the playoff. And of course, it makes the game this weekend more interesting. And that's why Auburn really needed to win it and not give them the ball back. Joe, when they got the ball back with 1 minute and 20 seconds, I was about 90% sure that Alabama was going to score a touchdown.
Yeah, even from the field position, because what happened was I was watching the game, and when it got to 4th down and Auburn was out to punt, I had to leave to go meet some people to go out to eat. And so I get there and I was actually getting ready to text you thinking Auburn had won. And then I show up to the restaurant and somebody's like, Alabama just scored. And I'm like, how? Because I thought at that point, okay, actually I left with 2 minutes to go. So I did not live see the Bigsby getting out of bounds on the run. Mm-hmm. And so I just assumed that Auburn ran off a lot of the clock, and maybe Alabama got the ball with 30 seconds to go.
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge mistake right there. But like I said, ultimately, what bothered me more than that was them not going for it for 4th down and them really not going for the 2-point conversion there. Because you know what? I mean, we talked about it earlier in the Ole Miss-Arkansas game that while we didn't like the play call that Sam Pittman chose, especially based on the way they were running the ball against Ole Miss, we liked that he went for 2. That was the right decision right there. And at that point, that would have been the right decision. You got a defense that is dog tired, that has played their rear ends off for you. You got a quarterback on one leg. Put it all on the line for one play. And you know what? If you lose, then did everything you could to win. And if you get it off, then Alabama doesn't get the ball back and you win the game. So I wish they would have done that. And, ultimately, I think that might have been the reason that Mike Bobo lost his job. I'm not sure who makes the play call right there. And something else, Joe, that wasn't talked about a lot during that game was that Anders Carlson, Auburn's number 1 field goal kicker, who, of course, has been there for 4 years now. His brother was there before him, got a strong leg, tore his ACL during the Mississippi State game. It wasn't available, so they had a backup kicker in. And that made a lot of difference. There were twice that Auburn punted the ball where they would have actually been able to kick a field goal with Anders out there. And that's another reason I think I like going for 2, because you're dealing with a backup kicker to make a field goal, to make an extra point. And so there was really no reason for them not to try and win the game right there. And like I said, you could try to go for it on 4th down to go and end the game in regulation.
Well, if you do that, the narrative changes, because you're right. I mean, Sam Pittman at Arkansas, nobody has ever questioned that the entire season. In many ways, a lot of Arkansas fans just look at that as just a great game that came down, to the last possession. Nobody really looks at that with heartbreak on the same level. It's the games like this, where you have the what ifs, where you have the most frustration. And I think, if they go for 2 and fail, then the narrative changes, and it's more like you're celebrating the fact that a 6-6 Auburn team almost knocked off Alabama. Yeah. Now you're looking at it you're just completely dismissing everything they did through 3 quarters of play, and everybody's just you gave the game away.
Right. At this point, yeah, you gave it away. You didn't put it all on the line to win. when Alabama gave you an opportunity to do that. And then it's a completely different narrative than you putting it all on the line, you being the underdog and you almost getting a win. Now it's you gave away one that you should have won.
Right, right.
All right, well, Joe, speaking of giving away a game, in the Egg Bowl, Mississippi State gave away a lot of opportunities, especially in that first half. I mean, I cannot believe how lucky Ole Miss was to be winning that game. And one series in particular, I mean, it really changed everything when Mississippi State had first and goal and they dropped 3 touchdown passes in 3 consecutive plays. I don't know that I've ever seen that before, Joe. And then, of course, the biggest problem that Mississippi State football has had ever since Mike Leach has been there, reared its ugly head again, and that is their pathetic play, the field goal kicker realm. And they missed the field goal, and the game was over at that point. I mean, Mississippi State had been moving the ball up and down the field, kept losing out on opportunities. And when they had the 3 touchdown passes dropped in a row, and then they followed that up with a missed field goal, the wheel kind of got broken, and Ole Miss was able to, not have a great game out of Matt Corral, not have a great game from the offense, but really win a game pretty comfortably that for a while there they had no business winning.
Right. It's the kind of game that, with a different coaching staff, Ole Miss probably loses historically, especially in Starkville in that environment. And so I think you have to give a lot of credit to the resiliency of the coaching staff, getting these players prepared. I don't think even on the 7th grade middle school level or, Pop Warner football level, you'll see 3 dropped touchdown passes with that kind of opportunity ever. I mean, it's just completely an anomaly. Additionally, I thought that coming in, one of the underrated matchups was not necessarily the quarterback matchup that everybody's talking about with Corral versus Rogers, but on the matchup between Sam Williams on defense and Charles Cross, the Mississippi State tackle, who's probably going to be an NFL prospect. Sam Williams just had his day with Charles Cross. Like, he could not stop him at all. You saw Williams get 2 or 3 sacks and just controlled the game defensively for Ole Miss. I thought that was big. And then, you have a state team that just doesn't really run the football. And Rogers had to throw the football, I think, 58 times. Whereas Ole Miss, surprise, surprise, we wish we'd had this in the Hugh Freeze era. Ole Miss has a good running attack.
Yeah.
And they were well equipped to go into this type environment and run the football and get out of there with more of an efficient game from Corral.
Yeah, and I mean, both Snoop and Ely had great games rushing the football, and that's what made the difference because it was not the sharpest game for Corral, wasn't the best game for the receivers, and the running game, especially in a game where Mississippi State was making a lot of mistakes on offense, is what really got the game done. And you're right, that was a game that Ole Miss historically would have lost, especially with them not playing their A game on offense. But their defense came out to play and made a lot of huge stops, especially Sam Williams. And they took advantage of the fact that Mississippi State couldn't capitalize on the opportunities they had. And that's what a good football team does. And I think that's the next step that Lane Kiffin has taken is he's got a team now that is good enough that when another team is given opportunities by Ole Miss, they don't capitalize, they make them pay for it.
Yes. Yes. And speaking of capitalizing, I mean, this was the year with the cycle where Ole Miss, wanted to win a lot of games. They went 10-2, the first time in school history. They've won 10 regular season games. So I think this was a game they had to win, like for the legacy of Matt Corral and the trajectory of the program right now going forward under Lane Kiffin. We'll see if they can win, the New Year's Six bowl game that they go to and get to 11 wins. That'll be the next big hurdle to clear. But, yeah, I think that this was just a great night for Ole Miss. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see where both of these programs go from here because Mike Leach had, I think, a better than expected season at Mississippi State at 7-5. But at the same time, that they don't like losing these rivalry games. And Leach has now lost I don't think he's won a rivalry game since 2012 when he was at Washington State.
Yeah, I mean, even when he was at Washington State and he had that great year, that one year where they were in the top 10 and top 5, he still lost to Washington that year to a bad Washington team. So that is definitely an epidemic that Mike Leach has is that he cannot win those rivalry games.
Yes.
So, like I said, great win for Lane Kiffin, seeing him at 10-2. And you hope that based on the season that he has, based on what it looks like it's going to be out there in the transfer portal. I've heard that Dylan Gabriel is highly looking at Ole Miss. I'm hoping that, Ole Miss is able to make a good push to hold on to Lane Kiffin. A lot of the jobs that I was worried about him taking, LSU was one of the ones that scared me a lot. Florida scared me a lot. They've already been taken. So really, I think the last chip to fall, I don't think that Oklahoma or Notre Dame would consider Lane Kiffin. Does Manny Diaz keep his job in Miami? And if Miami opens up, can Ole Miss hold off the Hurricanes? I think that's the last bastion of, whether we keep Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, that's true. And I think he still has a house like in Boca Raton or Miami. So that's also something to follow. Miami was definitely one I've always been kind of concerned about in the back of my mind. But the last thing I did also want to say about Ole Miss's season this year that's crazy is when you think about the injuries they overcame to like the receivers. And for Matt Corral to only throw like 20 touchdown passes, I think if you had told me coming into the season he just threw 20 touchdown passes, I would have thought they probably went like 6-6 or 7-5. And so that really impressed me with their ability to run the football, and the defense was better than expected.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the two biggest surprises I've had this year is I knew they had a lot of running back talent, but I didn't know if they could capitalize on it. And seeing this three-headed attack they have with Snoop Connor, Jerry Neely, and Peter Parrish has been just excellent. And, it's made it to where Corral doesn't have to do everything himself. And then just the way this defense has kept improving and the way that they've won games for Ole Miss. I mean, you look at it, there's two games for sure that were won by the defense. The Texas A&M game, that was all the defense. And then the Mississippi State game, that was a defensive effort, especially by Sam Williams. They got it done. And, Joe, you could even make an argument that in that Vanderbilt game, the defense is what got the win for us. So I think that was a great job done by Dave Doran this year, and I've just been so impressed with the defensive improvement.
Yes. And then with the Arkansas game and the Tennessee game, those are two games, I think the way they played out, Ole Miss historically loses both of those as well.
That's right. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some historic matchups we have in the Big Ten, the SEC championship games, and some of the other ones in championship weekend, and what really is going to make for a compelling weekend leading into the final college football playoff rankings reveal. And I want to thank everybody for listening. You can, of course, check out our YouTube channel to see this and all of our other episodes. And, of course, check out Spotify where all the old episodes are downloaded. And then you can follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show and like our Facebook fan page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.